Who wants to talk some Bears football? Oh, yeah. And when you think about Bears football, what stands out to you about Bears football? Well, there's so many other things. Organizational incompetence, crappy stadium, all of that. Hiring a first-time general manager after the last first-time general manager that you had that you gave way too long, you fired. That's Bears football. And mercifully for a lot of Bears fans, myself included, 2021 represented the end of the Ryan Pace, Matt Nagy era. A-E-R-R-O-R spelling is appropriate there. With that comes a new general manager from the Kansas City Chiefs front office in Ryan Poles, young man who at one point in time was a Chicago Bear way back in the days of training camp cut. And that, of course, also brought a new head coach, Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, hiring a defensive coordinator in an offense-first era of the NFL. Doesn't that sound like, you guessed it, Bears football? So not only did they yet again go with a first-time GM, yet again, they went against the grain in an off-season cycle full of offensive-minded guys being hired. They went contrarian and they hired a defense guy. Does that mean that defensive coordinators shouldn't get a shot as NFL head coaches? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is if you want to play championship football now, your offense has to come first. And typically your offense doesn't come first with a defensive-minded head coach. Typically. Not always, but typically. And when you look at this, you look at the last 3 Super Bowls. Look at the head coaches in those games. Sean McVay, Zach Taylor, offensive guys, right? Year before that, Bruce Arians, Andy Reid, offensive guys. Year before that, Kyle Shanahan lost, offensive guy. Andy Reid won, offensive guy. So, the last 3 Super Bowls, all of the teams were led by an offensive-minded head coach. So, of course, the Bears would go down the defensive path. And if you're going to say, well, the Patriots have done just fine with Bill Belichick, well, Bill Belichick is the outlier. He's the GOAT head coach. Let's cut the crap here. Like, he is that dude. Right? But even before, when you talk about in between, like these recent Patriots Super Bowl wins, 2017, Doug Peterson, offensive-minded guy. 2015 season, yes, Denver won almost exclusively on the back of their elite special defense, but they still had an offensive-minded head coach in Gary Kubiak. You know what I mean? So, interesting to me that the Bears went in the complete and opposite direction. Not surprisingly, because after all, that would, of course, be Bears football, trying to overthink shit. We'll see if it ultimately works out. The Bears were busy in the offseason, as you can imagine, with the new regime. Even though they didn't have an incredible amount of cap space, they had some. They were going to eat some dead cap as well. They traded Khalil Mack away to the Chargers for a second-round pick. Their first notable move in free agency ended up not being a notable move because they tried to sign Larry Ogunjobi to be their 3-technique defensive tackle, and of course he failed the physical, so he's not there. But Poles was able to pivot and shift and added Justin Jones and Al-Qadim Muhammad on that defensive line, brought in Nicholas Morrow to play outside linebacker alongside Roquan Smith, signed Tavon Young, you would presume, to be the nickelback, but of course he's injured, so he won't play. Then you look at the offense, and they brought in guys like Byron Pringle, Equanimeous St. Brown, Dante Pettis at wide receiver. And the draft also had a bit of a defensive leaning as well, because of course it fucking would, because it's Bears football! Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker were the 2 second-round picks. Now notable there is, as much as I didn't like the approach or the philosophy of drafting 2 defensive guys in round 2, they're both going to be day 1 starters in the secondary and could be very good. But this draft for Poles, at least initially, you could say, looks like it's going to bring a lot of potential year 1 contributors. Braxton Jones is going to start at left tackle. Trenton Gills, your punter. Velus Jones Jr., Trustin Ebner could bring some additional juice and speed to that offense. Then you even look at some of the undrafted guys, most notably Jack Sanborn, and I wouldn't be surprised at some point if he ends up being the starting Sam backer. So this first rookie class of Ryan Poles looks like it could be a pretty good one. And I know a lot of folks are going to focus on the guys like the Kyler Gordons and the Jaquan Briskers. But frankly, just for me, I could give a crap less about them. It's great if they develop. It is. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that Braxton Jones shows that he could be a starting quality left tackle in the league. What matters is that Velus Jones Jr. shows that he could be a weapon on the offensive side of the ball. What matters is as Treston Ebner balls out when he's given an opportunity to either supplant Khalil Herbert as Monty's backup or potentially be in the mix to replace Monty or be part of the solution to replace Monty after 2022 if the Bears don't re-sign David Montgomery. And the reason those are the picks that matter the most is because they're on the offensive side of the ball. We're in the 21st century. It's time that the Bears organization and Bears fans wake the fuck up and understand that the only thing that matters about this season is Justin Fields and his development. That is it. We can talk about all the drama with Roquan Smith, and of course I look at polls and I say, you should have had resolution to this matter one way or another months ago. You have plenty of future cap space, like what are you going to spend it on? At some point in time, you do have to invest in your team. If you say, we don't know that we want to invest that much in the off-ball linebacker, then don't invest in the off-ball linebacker and get rid of him and get what you can for him. So that was an unnecessary preseason distraction that eventually solved itself. Roquan's going to play out the string in 2022. The Bears were also very active on the waiver wire. How active they were was really surprising to me. But when you think about it, this is not, in theory, a good roster. It was lacking depth, so not surprised to see that they'll go and dip into others' shopping baskets. They brought in last year's first-round pick of the Oakland Raiders, Alex Leatherwood. We'll see if they give him a chance at some point to take over that right tackle job. Defensive tackle Armon Watts from the Minnesota Vikings. He might be a sleeper to be a guy that could start sometime this year. He started for the Vikings for half the season last year. You had undrafted guys like Sterling Weatherford. A number of guys that you look at, they put in, a total of 6-7 waiver claims that they got, guys? That's a lot. That is a lot. And it's because this Bears team needs a lot of work. And I respect the fact that, if nothing else, the front office realizes that they've got to continue to put in work here. I wish they would have put in a little more work to help Justin Fields on the offensive side of the damn ball, but whatever. When you look at this team, what I'm having trouble reconciling is why I'm seeing so many national media outlets look to this Bears team and assume not only that they're going to finish last in the NFC North. I mean, that could possibly happen. But I'm seeing predictions of 3-14, 4-13, and I'm just wondering where the hell that's coming from. Now, nobody could ever accuse me of being a Bears homer. Nobody could ever accuse me of being overly naive and incredibly unrealistically optimistic about this organization, because they deserve none of that benefit of the doubt. But even I've got to sit there and throw the BS flag a little bit to sit there and say that this team's only going to win 3 or 4 games based off of the way it's constructed. Let's look at last season. Last season, with a complete and total numbskull as their head coach and Matt Nagy, and with a combination at quarterback of Andy Dalton and Justin Fields, and starting the season with Andy Dalton as QB1, the Bears found a way to win 6 games. I'm sorry, but it feels crazy to think the floor is anything lower than 5 or 6 wins in 2022. It really does. I mean, Eberflus seems to be a better leader of men than Nagy was. Certainly a more competent guy in terms of what he does compared to what Nagy did or didn't do. I think Luke Getsy's a better play caller than Matt Nagy. I just don't get it. If you're going to say, well, they lost guys like Allen Robinson, well, they won 6 games and Allen Robinson didn't do shit last year. Well, they traded away Khalil Mack. Okay, what did he bring to the table last year? Honestly, it wasn't 2018 anymore. Akeem Hicks, same conversation. Like, some of these names you're going to point to are names. But in terms of their actual relevant performance to the team on field in 2021, it wasn't much. So they didn't lose much, is my point. So I'm just really struggling to see where this 3-14, 4-13 crap comes from. I look at this team and I say, this is a team that's certainly going to be able to run the ball. I'd be floored if they weren't an elite offensive unit in terms of running the ball, of course, because they're going to prioritize the running game because Bears football! But you've got David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, Treston Ebner, and then you're going to throw Justin Fields in the mix. He's certainly going to get more opportunities to run the ball this year, you would imagine. They're going to be towards the top of the pack, you would assume, in the league in terms of running the ball. And then on defense, are they really going to be that much of a worse off unit than what they were under Sean Desai's leadership last year? I don't think so. If anything, they'll probably be slightly better. They've certainly upgraded their defensive speed as a unit overall. Now, they're pretty young in the secondary, which may be a concern, but they weren't very good in the secondary last year, so how much different is that going to really be? Like, there are concerns abound. Like, the number one concern at the end of the day is Justin Fields' development. And we have questions about the offensive line. I think the offensive line is going to be no worse than last year's and perhaps even a little bit better. The receiving core, you could say, well, it's not very good, but arguably might be better than last year, which speaks to just how crappy Ryan Pace was at his job. But the only thing that matters here this year is Justin Fields' development. You got dopey Bears fans talking about, well, they can win 9, 10 games again in the wild card. And if they do that with defense and running the ball, then it's a wasted season. Everything is stupid, and you're stupid if you think otherwise. It is 4,000 yards passing or bust for Justin Fields. Because that means, A, that he probably started all 17 games. B, it means he only has to average like 230-something yards passing a game. That doesn't feel extreme. And 3, the Bears have never had a damn 4,000-yard passer. They need to catch up with the modern times of how the NFL game is played, and you need to do that through the air first and foremost. Nothing else matters. Like even the talk I've got about the record, who cares? The Bears win 10 games, but Justin Fields looks mid or worse, or he misses half the season, and they win some fluky games under Trevor Siemian coming in, then the whole season's a loss. It's stupid. If you win 6 games, but Justin Fields looks like a stud, then that means going into next offseason, you got to be aggressive because you found the dude. Now build up the team around him. But reality is, if Justin Fields shows he's the dude, you're probably going to win more than 6 games any damn ways. It all comes down to Justin Fields. That's not up for debate or discussion. You want to focus on winning and all this. Doesn't matter. Like, I look at this schedule, and I've seen some people say, well, the Bears' schedule is easy this year. Is it? Is it really? Like, the AFC East has potentially 3 playoff teams. They have the Bills, who are a Super Bowl contender, the Dolphins, the Patriots. I think they're both certainly in the playoff mix. Then you go to the NFC East, you're going to laugh. Last time I checked, they got the Cowboys and the Eagles, and both of those teams are better than the Bears. Washington's about equivalent. That's not an easy schedule. And then you got to play the Packers twice a year, so that's tough. The Vikings twice a year. And with an offensive-minded guy, they might be better. Maybe not, but they might be. The Lions probably going to be a little better this year. So, this whole notion of they got an easier schedule this year, I don't know about all that. Which probably makes me hedge my bets a little bit on the Bears this season. When I look at them and I look at their schedule, though, I look at that first 6 weeks, and that'll tell us a lot about this season, especially because the schedule gets tougher, I do think, later in the year. But you've got the home game week 1 against Trey Lance and the San Francisco 49ers, and you go to Green Bay in week 2 to take on Aaron Rodgers, hosting Lovie Smith and the Houston Texans in week 3. How about that subplot? They're in Soldier Field. Going to the Giants and to Minnesota in weeks 4 and 5, and then hosting Washington in week 6. Like, if you have any delusions about the Bears battling for the playoffs, they got to at least finish 3-3 in that stretch. But what you're really looking for here is for Justin Fields to get off to a good start. He's got a couple of good defensive tests early against San Francisco, Green Bay. We'll see what Lovie Smith's able to do with the Texans defense. But these are some winnable spots. This is where the Bears have got to show something with Justin Fields. Justin Fields has got to show something. Because then you go to the next 3 weeks. It's at New England. It's at Dallas. It's home against Miami. That could be a really rough stretch. And then I point to week 13 against Green Bay at Soldier Field. And the reason I point to that game is because the Bears play the Packers twice. Number 1 goal this year is Justin Fields' development. Number 2 goal is they have to beat Green Bay once. They have to. You can't let Aaron Rodgers be your daddy forever. And at some point in time, Justin Fields, if you want him to be the guy, he's going to have to beat the dude. And the unquestioned dude right now in that division is Aaron Rodgers. I look at this Bears team, and I'm probably playing it safe here and hedging my bets. But I've got them finishing 7-10 and third in the NFC North. Do I think 9 or 10 wins is out of the picture? Absolutely not. Do I care? Absolutely not. If Justin Fields throws for 3,200 yards and the Bears win 10 games, then it's a stupid season, in my opinion. If he throws for 4,000 yards and they win 6 games, I don't think it's a stupid season. Man, the whole trajectory of the Bears changes dramatically in a big hurry. And that's the point. This season is all about Justin Fields. Wins and losses are secondary. To those Bears fans that I see on social media worry about what the national media says, especially, they're not going to finish 3-14, 4-13. I agree with you, they're probably not. But it doesn't matter. Stop worrying about shit that doesn't matter. The only shit that matters this year is Justin Fields' development. Period.